Hello, everyone, and welcome to Jets, Nets, and Sets, your voice for the ultimate in hardcore sports. I'm your host, Stephen Blush, joined by the ultimate co-host, my man, your man, the man, Tony Mann. How you doing, Tony?
All right, Stephen. Hey, I'm excited to talk to our friend Ray.
Yeah. Now, this week's episode is a bit of a misnomer. I mean, will we be talking about Robert Saleh and the 2021 New York Jets?
Nope.
Will we be talking about Dr. J and the ABA New York Nets?
No.
Will we even be discussing the New York sets of World Team Tennis?
Well, not exactly.
Correct. We are not even discussing New York. In fact, for this great sports story, we will travel due north. Tony?
Do you mean Toronto Buffalo Royals of World Team Tennis?
No.
Or the New England Whalers of the World Hockey Association?
Nope.
Oh, you must mean the minor league hockey Lowell Lock Monster.
Definitely not. I am talking about a pro tennis team so sweet and succulent they could only be known as the Boston Lobsters. And to tell his story as the owner of the Lobsters, let us please welcome the king of the softball swing, the viceroy of the Volvo, original 1974 Boston Lobsters owner, Ray Ciccolo. Welcome, Ray, to our podcast.
Welcome,
Hey
Ray.
guys, how you doing?
Welcome.
Nice to see you both.
Great
It's
to
so
see
great.
you, Ray.
You know, we've gotten to know each other over the past few years. You were a huge help to my book and the upcoming film about World Team Tennis called Bustin' Balls, which just won a prestigious design award, by the way.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so you had so much to do with that. So we're just going to hold a little conversation. And I just kind of wanted to start, but you talk about your start in tennis, like how you got involved. And I don't know if it has anything to do with Volvo, but I know there's a Volvo connection to the sport. So kind of take
Yeah, I think that came a little later. I was reading a story, being an avid sports fan, as all Bostonians are. I was reading an article that said they're bringing in a new World Team Tennis, and Boston was an open market, and they were having an organization meeting up in Canada. You know, I just don't remember whether it was Montreal or Toronto, but it said, bring your check and you could own a team. So, like a crazy guy, I brought my check and I came away with the Boston franchise.
Wow.
What attracted you to the idea of team tennis? And I guess what were your expectations going into it too? Because this is not only a new team and a new league, but it's really a new concept of a sport.
Yeah. You know, I'm not sure I had a lot of expectations. One of the things is that Boston is a really, really hotbed of tennis, and it had the second biggest, most successful tennis tournament in the country, and one of the biggest in the world in Longwood. And that was the days of the amateurs, but the Rod Lavers and Stan Smiths and all the big names, before they went commercial and started to play for money, this tournament was always sold out in Boston.
Yeah, so it was really like there was this whole thing about indoor tennis that was happening at the time too, right? Like a lot of people were starting to play indoor because it was cold.
Oh yeah,
sure. 10 years before that, maybe.
A lot of clubs had popped up, and there was a lot of people, playing indoors. There was a lot of interest in tennis in the Boston area. I said, what better city than Boston to have a team?
Talk about those first league meetings and the first draft. What was going on in your mind? All that kind of stuff.
That was very, very, very interesting because, I have to be careful what I say, but there was a slick group from LA, and, they were involved in forming several leagues. It was so long ago that I don't want to name the leagues. I think it was the WHA, but in any event, you know, they were involved in all these, you know, leagues, these new leagues. And they were talking about, you know, starting up a new football league. And these were the guys, these were the movers and the shakers. As a matter of fact, I remember one particular meeting was in Houston. And I say, it was so long ago, I think it was Houston. And Gordie Howe was playing for one of the WHA teams.
Yeah.
And he says, come on. He says, we'll take all you guys back into the locker room to meet Gordie Howe after the game. So sure enough, he was around 50 then, still playing, still checking and being Gordie Howe.
Amazing.
And I remember seeing this, and, you know, they had to play another game right after this. They had to catch a bus and they were throwing all this wet uniforms and skates and equipment in their hockey bag, and they were trying to make it out of there. And I'm thinking, wow, this is not exactly what a hockey fan would think of when he thinks of one of these locker rooms. So anyway,
down and dirty, right there.
Yep. Well, it's, you know, the real thing, you know, and Gordie Howe, like all hockey players, you know, he back in the locker room, he takes out his teeth, and you got all these hockey players, and you say, wow, this is a new experience. In any event, it was interesting meeting with all these guys, and they had formed a committee, and they had started signing players. So they already signed some players when we went to the initial organizing meeting. Now, every other tennis organization in the world was boycotting World Team Tennis. So if you ever played for World Team Tennis, oh my God, you were a scourge. And, you know, so here I am right after I signed up, and I figured right away I'm going to have to sign some players. So I take my wife and I, we fly to Wimbledon shortly thereafter, and we start trying to talk to players. They wouldn't even talk to us. So,
wow,
you know, they were told if they played in team tennis, they would ban them from Davis Cup, and they would ban them. I mean, which was absolutely ludicrous, because if you think of the supply and demand equation of pro sports, the more people that are bidding for your services, these guys could have made more money and driven up, you know, prize money and so on. But they just, you know, they were purists. You couldn't do that. You couldn't clap. You couldn't make noise. Oh my God, we were like, you know, so very interesting time.
It's hard to imagine in today's sport climate with the way people participate now. It kind of was a holdover from World Team Tennis, and it affected all sports later on in a way.
Yeah, it did. I mean, you've got a complete 180 now. Now, my God, some of the fans, if they're not down there on the field, you know, it's like that. It's like that stripper in the Super Bowl there, you know.
The streaker.
You know, he wants to participate. Hey, you know, I want my 5 minutes of glory.
Great.
But it was really a like, we'll get into it, but like early in the season, I mean, Jimmy Connors and Ivan Goolagong, I mean, they got banned after winning the Australian. They weren't allowed to participate in the French and the Italians, if you remember that.
Yeah, it took courage on their part. They obviously saw something that maybe, you know, this might have some merit, you know. So, you know, gradually some of them started to sign, but, you know, I think the owners kind of made a mistake. They started to acquiesce to schedules with the players, and I think that was a mistake.
Sure, there's a bunch of problems, and we'll talk about all those problems. I want to talk about the naming of the team, like the first days of the organization of the operation, naming the team, choosing a mascot. You have the office with all this red and black lobster stationery, you know. Talk about the behind the scenes of this operation.
Well, this was really kind of amusing. You know, Bud Collins, who was the premier tennis writer in the world, he used to write for internationally, as you all know. And
A legend. He's a legend.
yeah, he was remarkable. And so he wrote a story that said local Volvo dealer buys, the Boston franchise. So, again, the details are a little sketchy, but pretty soon someone shows up at my Volvo dealership and he says, hi, they said, there's someone here to see you. And they bring him in my office and this young kid shows up. He says, hi, I'm John Corp. I go to Harvard and I want to run your team. And he was a ballsy kid. This kid had a lot of moxie and he was very, very, very good. So he was also a tennis player, came from a very wealthy family that, country clubs and tennis and so on. So needless to say, we hit it off and I hired him. And so that's where it began.
Yeah.
How'd you come up with the name of, when you came up with the name of Boston Lobsters?
Well, it's so funny because I had a conversation with my brother not too long ago, one of my brothers, and he absolutely alleges that he was the one that named the team, and he gave me that name. But he
what
really
were some
wasn't.
of the clunkers that didn't make it? Was there any clunkers you can remember?
Again, we had a gigantic, at the time I remember I had a product called Renault. And
Le Car, Renault Le Car.
Renault Le Car, oui,
yeah.
oui, Le Car. So anyway, we decided to have a contest. In the meantime, Bud Collins had written a story, it seems to me. And in my conversations with Bud Collins, somehow that name came up. And Bud Collins, I'm almost sure, suggested that name in the paper. So then we have this contest and we're going to give away a brand new car to whoever names the team, and we select the name. Well, we are, between you and I, we knew what the name was going to be before. But, for publicity, we said, we're going to have this big contest. So, but we had to make sure, because I've been around the block a little bit, even though I was very, very young, I knew that if I had, 10,000 people sending the name Lobsters, I would have 10,000 lawsuits saying I named the team. So we had to have some sort of device that we put all the names in the hat, and we would draw one. So anyone that said Boston Lobsters, and that was specified in the rules, whatever it was. And so we pulled out some young man's name, and he won the car, and we called that, and we announced that we were going to call the team the Lobsters. But again, from the cute little idea of a lob, and which is a tennis term, and a lobster with two claws and a tennis racket. So
very good.
We then hired, John hired some artists and got some renditions, and now he was big on a lot of lobster gear, equipment. We had more equipment and T-shirts and tennis rackets. I mean, we bought more stuff than any of the franchise, all of them put together. So we really marketed it and saturated the area with lobster stuff.
And it fit regionally. It makes sense also.
Yeah,
obviously
it did.
Obviously.
So talk about putting this team together. I know you draft Kerry Melville, you draft Ian Tiriac, the Mad Romanian.
Yeah.
Dracula.
Let's start with this. There's one story that I found that I guess you had drafted this guy named Nicky Pilic.
Yeah, very good player.
Yeah,
very good.
But he was kind of like he wasn't great to deal with, though, from what I hear.
I don't remember that. What happened was, again, we drafted Nicky Pilic. We drafted Kerry Melville, who was in the top 5 in the world, and Nicky Pilic, and all of a sudden, somehow, as we went along, more and more players started to show an interest in playing world team tennis. Somewhere, somehow, Roger Taylor showed some interest, and his wife was a pro tennis player. So we signed Roger Taylor to be the #1 in singles, you know, our #1 male player. And we traded Nikki Pillage to
New York.
New York team.
Yeah.
The sets.
The sets.
Nice guy. I don't remember
the sets.
anything.
Okay, so talk about you know, Kerry Melville. You have a very colorful team because Kerry Melville ends up marrying Raz Reed, your other players, and you have
Well,
this
let me
crazy.
tell you that.
Yeah, we'll start with that part first.
All right. You know, I sympathize with you know, all these pro sports teams because a lot of things the fans don't know, and you know, you do the best you can. So I signed this guy Roger Taylor. He was in the top 10 in the world. Big serve. He was going to be, you know, really a macho male player. He shows up with a bad arm. In the meantime, I signed Raz Reed, and I remember John and I driving to South Carolina, like in the middle of the night, trying to watch an exhibition match of Raz Reed and somebody else. So we signed Raz Reed, and I give him the kind of contract that says, you know, for every #1 start you get, you know, you're going to get this bonus. Everything's relative. I don't remember what it was back then, but it was substantial because I already had my #1, and I'm thinking, oh, this kid will never play. But Taylor shows up with a sore arm. Now Raz Reed becomes my #1. So I'm not only paying Raz Reed, I have to pay Taylor, who didn't play much. So, you know, that was expensive. And then, as you point out, he and Kerry Melville kind of hit it off and ended up getting married. And then we also signed a girl by the name of Trish Bostrom, who was a kind of a concert pianist and an interesting girl. And we signed Janet Newbury. Now, Janet Newbury was going to be, you know, play a big part in this. She was going to be our #2 female player, and she shows up. I also with, yeah, no, I have to pick my words carefully.
No, but she showed up like way out. She showed up way out of shape, let's say.
Yes.
And
so,
didn't she like blow out both her knees because of her weight?
yeah, something like that.
Oh, no.
But you know, again, when you think about some of these proteins, you just, it's not in your best interest to scold them, yell at them, chastise them, penalize them. Then you get nothing out of them. So it was, again, one of those delicate things. It was where, you know, it was a lose-lose, you know. So,
well, speaking
anyway,
of yelling, speaking of yelling at the teams, you had a pretty colorful head coach. Why don't you tell us about him?
Oh my God. There wasn't any better than Ian Tiriac. You know, I would give anything. And as you know, since he left the tennis business, he's the most successful man in all of Romania. So he was creative, he was clever, he was smart, he was savvy. He gave us some tapes when he was playing for the Romanian hockey team. He played the Russians. And somewhere in my archives, I have all these tapes of him playing the Russians, and the Russians were playing dirty. So this guy breaks a hockey stick over his knee and he charges the Russians. I mean, this guy was unbelievably colorful. He also had this knack, which was insane, of eating glass. So I don't know how he started it, but he actually, it wasn't a trick or anything. He would eat glass. So we had this party at my house with all the players and whatnot. I have 3 daughters, and the 3 daughters were there, young girls, and this guy scared the bejeebies out of him. Remember, he had this long black mustache, and he had the blackest hair. Yeah. He was very hairy, you know.
He's like Rasputin or Dracula, they used to call him.
Yeah,
too.
Exactly. He had that nickname, Dracula.
He's our hero. This guy's our hero, okay?
He is. He was certainly mine. He was something. So he was the heart and soul of the team. But sure enough, he breaks a glass and he eats this glass at my house. And I'm thinking, oh my God, of course you're worrying about this guy bleeding to death, his internal organs. But whatever it was, he I don't know what possessed him to develop that kind of a knack.
There's
Anyway,
also a story of him during he's talking to the team and he pulls out a live lobster and bites its head off or something like that.
Yeah. Again, they didn't know he had a lobster behind him, and sure enough, he's trying to motivate him. He takes out this lobster. He did a lot of things, and
he was an intimidating guy. He was an intimidating guy.
Absolutely, and he couldn't be intimidated. We have one particular game he was playing. It wasn't Detroit. It may have been Indiana, but it was late in the season, and he got some really bad calls, and he was threatening to take his team off the court. And so the umpire said, 30 seconds, during switchovers, you got 30 seconds. And he was continuing to argue, and they said, so they gave the point to the other team, and then they said 30 more seconds, and again, he didn't go out in the court, and they assessed another point to the team. Well, they kept doing that until we lost the game and we lost the match, and that game cost us the playoffs.
Right.
So,
and actually, just so you know, that was a game in Miami.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, it was against the Florida Flamingos, and that is probably the game that cost you the season. That probably cost.
Thank you. I knew it was. I was trying to recall that. Now I do. That name, the Flamingos, come to mind more than the Florida.
Yeah. So that's.
And you're in Florida now.
Yes.
So that.
The other thing for me was that there were a lot of big league teams that own franchises like Los Angeles and Jerry Buss. He was a terrific guy. I had a great friendship with Jerry, and they wanted to keep their stadium occupied, to put some revenue in for their stadiums that sat empty all summer. So they got franchises. And so you got to meet a lot of interesting people. Jerry Buss, I remember one of our meetings to this day. He owned a small hotel in Palm Desert. And so one of our meetings was out there at Jerry Buss's hotel.
Yes.
All right.
So,
here you are, like a car dealer, and now you're rubbing elbows with all the big shots.
absolutely. It was a hoot. Probably one of the more interesting phases of my life that's had some interesting phases. One of the things was that, Bob Kraft was one of my first season ticket holders, and that's how Bob Kraft got involved with pro sports. And
was his son your ball boy?
He absolutely was. To this day, several years ago, I went to a Patriots. Yeah, several years ago, I went to a Patriots game, and Robert Kraft hosted me, and I was in his box before the game, and Jonathan came up and said, "I used to be your ball boy." So that's the only one. Everybody in Boston that had young kids that were into tennis at all. Ted Kennedy's son, he had to be a ball boy, and on and on. So again, you got to meet some interesting. Sports does some interesting things to people and breaks down a lot of barriers.
There was another interesting thing about your team was that there were a lot of young reporters who covered your team who went on to big things. Leslie Visser, Dan.
Oh, sure. The biggest of all, I would say, is Mike Lupica.
Oh, yeah.
Mike at the time was at BC, and he became a tennis writer. And then from there, he went to New York. And of course, the rest. He's a huge, also
Len Berman.
Len Berman. And
He's a big sports guy.
Yeah.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
said
Dan
Leslie
Shaughnessy
Visser,
was just starting out, and he covered. You know, I was looking back at some of the bylines and some of these big sports guys, writers that covered the Lobsters. It was a riot because they were just getting started.
Great.
You know,
How would you characterize the local press response to the Boston Lobsters?
too good.
Oh,
Too
great.
good. What I heard was that Red Auerbach was furious that the Lobsters were getting more press than the Celtics. So
Let's face it, he was just furious all the time anyway, okay?
yeah, well, anyway, you know, that's a story that got back to me. One of the writers were telling me that. But what we did, and the Celtics were in their heyday at that time, and every Sunday they were on national TV. You had to have the Celtics, and in May the Celtics were always in the playoffs, so you knew that was going to be a big game. So one Sunday, we dressed up someone in a full lobster costume. And during the playoffs, and it was on national television, we got this guy walking around in a lobster suit. And for that, we got a scathing letter from the Celtics, which I cherish to this day. So anyway, you know, they weren't too happy about us raining on their parade. And looking back, I certainly can understand they were right.
Well, this was a time for like a possibility for a new league to be a breakout. Like we didn't know at that time if World Team Tennis could have took over and become a mega thing, or any of these leagues could have. It was like a new experimental time with these new leagues. People were excited, and it's before kind of the franchising and all this type of stuff where players could just jump team to team. This is when players were on a team for their whole life. Like Carlos he was on the Red Sox for his whole life.
Sure.
They didn't have this thing where they could jump and get a bigger contract. So this is like a new opportunity, maybe a new sport would have taken over. So luckily the Lobsters got this great kind of all kinds of coverage. Some of the teams didn't, like the Flamingos didn't get great coverage.
Yeah,
Some we know that didn't.
Well,
like
look at the
we're
Marlins.
covering them more than they got in the day.
Sure, but look at to this day the Marlins. They can't their attendance, and they've struggled. They can't draw anything, and so it isn't only tennis. It's I suppose it's whatever the makeup of Miami is.
Do you think it's to do with your enthusiasm and passion about it? Why everybody got behind it? Like
I think so.
You were already in the community, and then they like want to check it out.
I think so. I was always big into PR, and John Korf was also. John Korf was, he would do anything, and so I remember like he went to the health editor, and he would feed him a story about one of the guys on our team, what he does to stay healthy, and that would make a story. Then he would go to the food editor, and he would feed him a story about, Tyriak, what his favorite recipe and what he likes to make at home. And then he went to the entertainment editor, and they did a story on Pat Bostrom being a concert pianist. And so, we were in the paper all the time. We found more angles and ways to be in the paper. So, and I think, the sports writers, they like to think they're attaching themselves to something that could be successful,
Yeah. We could talk for a long time, but we want to keep it this kind of in a tight.
Sure.
This tight. But when did you know it was over? Like what? And talk about the end. I know there was talk of moving the team to Hartford. There was something about Phil Esposito being part of the group.
Yeah.
There was some sort of weird merger.
I'll tell you another story.
Yeah.
The first year, a lot of people offered to buy in, which I turned them down. And then Cosby, who was a tennis player, he wanted a part of the team. I don't remember him willing to pay any money. He wanted to, use his name and, just be a part of the team and help the team and promote the team. But none of that came to pass. And then after the season, some of the teams were fairly successful, some weren't. And the conversation was changing the format, changing the time frame, changing. I mean, everything had become so, different from what the original concept was. So it's year 2 or year 3, they did everything totally different. And then they went back to the original format. By then, I think we had lost a lot of momentum.
Sure.
And, we allowed players to come and go as they wanted. They could play only home games, which ticked off, I think Baltimore signed Jimmy Connors and he only had to play home games. Well, that's great. But when you come to Boston without Jimmy Connors, now you got the fans thinking this is a hoax. And so I started to lose a little bit of that enthusiasm. And it's really hard when you get, whatever it was, 8 or 10 owners, everybody pulling in a different direction.
Mm-hmm. What was what are you proudest of in terms of this? Because I'm sure at one point it was kind of painful, and now you could kind of look back on it and like a certain
Yeah,
thing.
it
You got
was
people like us
painful.
who've kind of re-understood it for what it was, and I think there's a whole new crowd of youth who kind of are looking at this in that way. Frankly,
Sure. I would just digress a second and say, if we had the kind of cable television outlets that we have now, where they're really fighting for content and fighting to fill the airways, and we could have got any kind of a cable contract that could have given us the kind of money that we needed to increase the salaries of the players so that they would commit to a season and not play half the year and come and go and you never know when they were coming. If we had that, I think it could have been very successful. But I figured out early on, without that, we're going to struggle. And you're not going to get all the big name players. You just aren't. And so that was a problem.
It's funny because you didn't have, like, let's say, the celebrity name on your team, but you still had a lot of focus on your team. You didn't have Billie Jean, but you still had the charismatic guy and you still get the press. It's kind of interesting. Like, people always think they got to spend the most to get the best player or whatnot, but you see where I'm going with that kind of.
Sure. Well, again, I think that, we did a tremendous amount of behind the scenes work, and John Korf being, so young, he's probably 22 years old.
Wow.
He recruited all these young kids. And so we had people holding banners and writing letters. And I mean, the amount of energy that was put in, it's almost like running a political campaign. He who works the hardest most often wins. And so John Korf, that's the kind of guy he was. And we had a bunch of other good people, around him.
That kind of leads to, like, I had this one other question that I read somewhere, but it sounds so fantastic that it can't be true. Was that, did he bring a busload of people from a mental hospital to one of your games?
I don't know if I ever heard that story, so I won't, I can't say. I don't remember that, but it wouldn't surprise me. They were probably a busload of seniors from a senior center or something, but you never know. John would do anything.
Yeah, I had heard 3 busloads from a local mental hospital.
It could very, very well be, and it wouldn't surprise me.
Wow. Well, that's the essence of World Team Tennis right there, right?
Yeah.
The chance to even try something like that. Ray, you've really meant a lot to this project, and I really value everything you've done. And we've been talking about doing something at the Boston Sports Museum when life goes back to normal. So I hope we could all, work together on that. But, you've had your, I know you were car dealer of the year in one of the local papers up there this past year. So your legacy still continues there, but your place in Boston sports history is undeniable. And I want to thank you for your time.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you both so
Ray, you've
very
been
much. This has been a pleasure, and I hope let's stay in touch, and let's hope that this is going to be very successful.
Yeah, and
Fantastic.
we want to tell everybody to read about Ray, the Boston Lobsters, and the other teams in Stephen's new book, Bustin' Balls. And Ray's a legend, Ian Tiriac, all these people. When you read about them, you can't help but just be drawn into it. It's an amazing story.
It's fun. It was fun.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Thank you so much, Ray. Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you. And thank you
Bye-bye.
for everyone for joining us.
Thank you,
Okay,
Ray.
stay safe. Bye-bye now.
Goodbye, everyone.